And finally, environmental advocates gathered in the Legislative Office building Thursday to protest the DEC's recommendation last week to allow hydrofracking on private lands in New York. The DEC's 900-page report on the process protects the New York City and Syracuse watersheds in areas within 500 feet of primary aquifers. But protesters in Albany said that's not enough.
We're here to tell the governor we can't be bought. He's basically banned fracking in the watershed of New York City and Syracuse. Why can't he ban it and protect the whole state?
When we talk to administrative people, or frankly, we talk to the industry, they're going to tell you what hydrofracking brings. We want to know what hydrofracking's going to take away. What are we going to lose from rural character of the community? What are we going to lose from existing industry? What are we going to lose in agriculture, tourism, recreational opportunities throughout New York State?
All right, you heard from the environmental advocates. Time now to hear from the DEC directly. And for our interview with Commissioner Joe Martens, we'll send it over to Karen DeWitt from New York State Public Radio.
Thanks, Matt. Commissioner Martens, we asked you here today to explain a little more about hydrofracking. As we saw in the headlines at the start of the show, kind of a controversial practice. But we did reach a milestone in recent days when you announced that the DEC, the state, will eventually allow hydrofracking on private lands. So what is the timetable on that? How soon could permits be issued? And briefly, what has to happen before that happens?
Sure. Well, let me back up a step and just say that the DEC has been at this for over 3 years.
That's right.
We issued a revised or a supplemental generic environmental impact statement, which is the kind of that sets the regulatory framework for gas drilling in New York. We scoped that document back in 2008. We put out an SGEIS, as it's called, in 2009, and then we took public comments on it. We had over 13,000 public comments. So DEC has been very busy since December of 2009 reviewing those comments, making revisions to the plan, and obviously I arrived on the scene a bit later.
Yeah,
so
just a few months ago,
exactly.
Right? Yeah.
So DEC was well along in this process and had spent an enormous amount of time studying the issue, reviewing technical reports, and these 13,000 comments from individuals. So the document that we released a week or so ago was revisions to that 2009 draft based on the mountains of comments we received and a review of the technical reports, in addition to looking at what's happened in other states. Obviously, places like Pennsylvania have been drilling for a while now. They've had a number of episodes or experiences there that we've looked at very closely because we want to make sure that they aren't replicated in New York.
Yeah, we'll get to that in a moment. Now, it's not just drilling anywhere, right? There's restrictions on the New York City watershed and the Syracuse watershed. They're not going to be allowed to drill there, which some people say, well, that's not fair. What's the difference between those areas and the other parts of the Marcellus Shale?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and I think it's largely been misunderstood, and it is a major change from the previous draft. We prohibited drilling in the New York City watershed and Syracuse watersheds and over what are known as primary aquifers. These are underground aquifers that serve major metropolitan areas in terms of water supply. The difference in the two watersheds is that Syracuse and New York are the only two unfiltered water supplies in New York State, and two of only a handful nationally. So those areas...
They're more vulnerable.
And that's only part of the story, that they're more vulnerable. They obviously serve large populations, but it's the fact that they both get what is called a filtration avoidance determination from federal EPA. And those determinations are delicate ones. They review everything that happens in those watersheds. If they don't get that FAD, as it's so-called FAD, they would have to filter. And in the case of New York City, that's a $9 billion proposition.
Yeah.
So it's not even, it's not the spills or the prospect of spills or contamination that we're most concerned about. It's the fact that just the mere activity related to hydrofracking and that industrial activity could swing the FAD the other way toward a disapproval.
Essentially cost prohibitive is what you're saying. I guess the question that people have, though, who have wells, well water, and there might be drilling nearby, is their drinking water going to be safe? I mean, that's what you hear from everybody.
Absolutely. And I
is
think, well, we certainly think so. We've taken precautions across the board, not just in the New York City and Syracuse watersheds. We have increased the setbacks from water supplies, whether it's a surface reservoir or a private well. We've increased setbacks. We've increased all the controls around the actual surface operations itself. Stormwater controls are very important on and near a well pad. How we contain the use of chemicals on the site are all very strictly controlled now.
So is there going to be like more liners or something in the wells than's been required in other states? And do you think that's going to contain any of the chemically laced water from coming out into people's wells?
Just like, any activity where there's the presence of chemicals and activity, we are taking several layers of precautions, again, on how they handle the chemicals, stormwater controls, just runoff from the site from rain, snow, and other things. We will have what is known as a general permit, stormwater permit, that is specifically designed for this industrial activity. We have some of the best technical people in the country at DEC, in the water division and the minerals division. They worked cooperatively to come up with these controls that are, there's many redundant measures to make sure that if something happens, it's contained on the site. So we think we've taken every precaution possible to make sure that there isn't problems, and if there are, that they can be contained.
And they're going to be looking at it,
yes,
monitoring it. They'll be out there, make sure that they're doing
absolutely.
It right. Now, about those chemicals you mentioned, the gas companies keep a lot of these chemicals kind of secret, saying it's a trade secret. They don't want their competitors to know. But I think the DEC listed something like 322 different known chemicals that they use, and some of them are possible carcinogens. There's like methane, benzene, other ones I can't even pronounce but sound really bad.
Right.
And you're going to try to force the gas companies or require them to make these the names of these chemicals public. How will you go about that?
We will simply be required as part of their permit applications as a condition of their conducting this activity in New York. They have to disclose all of those chemicals to us. They will also be required to disclose them to the public. Now, there is a provision in our law that says if there are trade secrets involved, that they can be protected. And obviously, DEC's first task will be to see when they make a request that certain chemicals, and it's not the chemicals that they're concerned about not disclosing, it's the formula itself. It's the
How they
mix
mix
of
them all together.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So there may be instances where we won't give the exact combination of chemicals, but all the chemicals will be known and listed.
People know. And I guess the key with that is then you can test and see if they show up places that they shouldn't be. If
Absolutely,
you know what
it's
they
important.
Are, right?
And it's important for emergency responders if there's incidents that they know what they're dealing with. So obviously it's important not just to the public, but to DEC and to emergency responders.
Now we're talking about all the safety precautions and worries that people have, but there's a lot of people in the state that want this, right, and believe it's going to be an economic development benefit to the really troubled upstate area. Do you have any idea how many jobs it could create or what effect it might have?
Sure.
If it goes through?
We've looked across the border again to Pennsylvania. There was a Penn State study in 2008, I believe, that looked at the economic activity specifically from this high-volume hydrofracking. And they estimated in 2008 in Pennsylvania it created about 28,000 jobs, about $2.3 billion of economic activity, and about $230 million in tax revenue. That was in 2008. That activity is all increased so that in 2009 the estimates for overall economic activity are closer to $4 billion.
So it could be comparable in New York.
It could be comparable in New York, obviously not right away. We anticipate that the industry will be slow getting up to speed. We obviously have to review permits. We will do it methodically. We have constraints right now on our own staff resources to review applications, but we'll review the applications that we can responsibly review.
And about Pennsylvania, you mentioned earlier, they had some real high-profile accidents there. Now, you went down there and looked at those. Do you think that you learned something from what they did that it could be prevented from happening in New York?
Absolutely. It was was an eye-opener, going to see the sites, myself. It's the second time I've seen drilling operations in Pennsylvania. This is the first time as a DEC employee. But it was Bradford County, Pennsylvania. The specific site we looked at was in the town of Leroy. It was a Chesapeake site, in which case there was literally a mechanical...
Chesapeake, that's the company, Chesapeake Energy, right?
Yes,
yeah.
Chesapeake,
okay, cool.
yep. It was a mechanical failure at a flange on a piping above the frac site, and about 10,000 gallons of frac fluids spilled onto the well pad, and then because the containment structure around the well pad wasn't constructed properly and had sloughed as a result of heavy rains and spring thaw, materials did get released from the site. Chesapeake did respond very quickly. They had 6 vacuum trucks on the. They had 2 on the site already. They called in 4 more. I think the the amount of actual damage there was minimized. There was some there was signs that vegetation had been killed mostly by the heavy salts in the brine that comes out of the frac fluid.
But you think that's something that could be averted if you have the right rules and regulations?
Yeah, clearly there was.
State.
The site was not had not been constructed and maintained properly, and I think Chesapeake admits that that was the case. It wasn't an egregious situation. They had lots of heavy spring rains, but it was a situation that we think could have been avoided.
Now, in the couple minutes that we have left, I wanted to go over your background a little bit. You're not new to government. You worked for Governor Andrew Cuomo's father, right? Mayor Cuomo, on the 2nd floor, which is the cool place to work, right? if you're the inside, yours is environmental advisor.
Yes.
Right,
yeah.
and after that you worked for the Open Space Institute, which is acquisition of land. And about maybe a year and a half ago, you gave a speech in that position. It was at Union College, and according to Gannett, which has the transcript, you said we should go slow on fracking, perhaps even wait for an EPA study that is to come out in 2012 to 2014. Now, have you changed your mind on all of that now, or is it getting into this position you've got to see to more interests, the greater range of interests than before? I mean, do you have your own worries about it?
To the point about taking time, I think New York State has done exactly that. We have taken our time, and I have to emphasize, we're not ready to permit this activity yet, and we won't be for quite some time. The SGIS that we released is still a draft. It's still going to be open for public comment. Then we have to respond to those comments. So it's not going to be, at least until next year before we're in a position to issue permits. So we are going slow, and as I said at the outset, DEC has been at it for over 3 years. So we should go slow. To the point about EPA, I think after, again, having now been inside DEC for a few months, I'm convinced that DEC is well ahead of the nation. They're ahead of EPA, Department of Energy. They have been looking at this issue intensively, and drilling is not new in New York, and neither is hydrofracking. They have hydrofracked in New York, but not with the high volumes of water that are going to be used in this new process, which is called high volume hydrofracking, and that's the distinction.
You also said in that speech that hydrofracking and regulating it could possibly be DEC's biggest challenge in the 40 years it's been in existence. And now you're the head of it.
Well, I'm always up to a challenge.
All right, well, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Commissioner Joe Martens, for coming in.
My pleasure, Karen. Thank you.
And now back to Matt.
Thanks, Karen. Time now for our New York Now poll question. Do you agree with the DEC's recommendation to allow hydrofracking on private land? Log on to our website to let us know, WMHT.org/New York Now. You can email us at nynow.